Hey
Welcome.
guys.
Thank you for joining.
Hey.
So we are at 1 minute past start time here. We're going to give it one more minute for people to jump on here. And then we will kick this off. Thanks everybody for being on time. It's good to see some new faces and some, I won't say old, some faces that we've seen before. Good to see
Oh
a
no,
nice mix. Welcome everybody.
definitely old. And Steve, I'm just wondering how to get involved.
Awesome. Can tag you in for sure.
No, I was being sarcastic based on last week's
Oh
conversation.
yeah, fortunately, everybody here figured out how to get involved rather than sending countless messages saying, how can I help? You just jump in like you're
Yeah.
all doing. Right. We're admitting people as they come. Give it another few seconds for people to jump in, but thanks everybody for coming along for the ride.
なんでスピーカーをミュートのスピーカーをミュートとはどういうこっちゃいなと。よいしょ。
All right, folks, I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. We're going to do a bit of a review of some of what came in the survey. That'll give people time to jump in and join anyway. And then we'll get into the discussion because that's what I want to spend the majority of the hour on. So thanks to all of you who did fill out the survey, whether you did or not. I know some people didn't see it in time. So if you didn't and you still wanted to participate, jumping in now is awesome. So first couple of questions here. We're just addressing my original core question about this top 10 for LLMs list, which is honestly, do we still want it? Do we still need it? And, the feedback here, looking at it, is the LLM top 10 still useful? You can see the shape of the distribution here. I will note this cutoff at 5 because there were no votes below 5 in terms of people saying this was useful. This came out to a very high average indeed. So I think it's great. People still find the list useful. The next one was a very pointed question, and I don't know why the last one was on a 10 scale and this one is on a 5. Must have been feeling different at the time. But very pointedly, is the top 10 still needed? Is the LLM top 10 still needed in a world with a great agentic top 10? And I think this was a more crucial question. Again, I think the feedback, you see it's largely skewed towards people saying yes, very much so, that almost all of it is 4 and 5 saying we need a separate list. So I think that, the feedback that came summarized was that they wanted two different lists, that one was focused on, say, how the models themselves fail inside applications, the others more inside autonomous systems. But I think there was a great comment in here from, I think it was Rock. I'm going to put it up here, but then Rock, maybe I'll just ask you to just speak to this for a second, because I think the way that you categorize this was very interesting. So I'd love to have you share it with the team.
Yeah. So I think, without like reading out right off the screen, I think the big distinction between the LLM top 10 and the agentic top 10 is when the LLM stops being a part of the system, right? It becomes a part of your chatbot application or a part of a document review process or a part of this into a world where it now takes autonomy and now starts calling tools it now has agency. And I think that's really the biggest differentiation. So I think while like on the surface, it looks like there's some overlap between the two top tens. I think Agentic picks off where the LLM leaves off, where the LLM stops, right? Because when we originally wrote the top ten, or rather, I was a part of the original one. Steve and team did. Um, like Agentic was even a word, right? It was like way off in the horizon. Nobody was even thinking about it, and then boom, right? It's here. It came out as Fast and Furious, and that jump between we're using the LLM to help us with a thing and generate some output into now we're using an agent that still very clearly has Gen AI underneath it and LLM underneath it, but then to actually take action upon things and tool calls, and that has memory and multi-agentic patterns and all that. And I think those are the two distinctions between the two.
Great. So I'd like to open up the floor at this point to anybody. I'd like to keep it on this target of assuming we have two lists, and that is my base assumption at this point, is that we want to keep the base list. How do we avoid just trying to make this next iteration of the LLM top 10 become another agentic top 10? How do we think about the differences? Anybody else want to add some perspective or comments there? I see Rico has his hand up.
Yes, thank you. So I also really like Work's input on that, because at the end of the day, I think agentic applications are the operational platform, but in our list, we should have the distinction of the risk for the technology itself, right? So in my opinion, we should, if we plan to do a next iteration, that for every entry lead, we need to challenge the entry itself, right? So that we don't get into another agentic use case, which I saw in many LinkedIn comments and also in the translation when I did it on German, so that we don't get like agentic applications part 2. So we still have like the LLM risks, which then builds on top for our next iteration, maybe for the agentic applications. But I think there's much risk lying just with LLMs itself.
Great. Anyone else want to add on? I saw some hands go up and then maybe go down. Anybody else want to go? Feel free to just shout out a comment if you have one.
I think it's going to be very difficult keeping things clearly distinct. I'm even looking at the OWASP top 10 for web applications and for APIs, and there's still quite a bit of overlap. I think there are things that are distinct, but looking at the agentic top 10, there's going to be a good amount of overlap. Prompt injection, tool misuse, identity and privileges. Those I think need to be on the top 10 list, because when you're looking at the original layout that we did, the data flow diagram and architecture, we had, hey, here's the LLM component. It's wrapped around an application. User interacts this way. The LLM also has access to other tools and backend systems. So unless we remove that and deconstruct that and move it entirely into the agent system, which not all systems like that are agentic, which is even more confusing. I think that we just need to be okay with some overlap. Personally, I think it makes sense to try and create our list, and then if there is overlap, try to downplay or create that separation between the agentic AI top 10 and the LLM top 10.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think overlap is fine as long as we make the clarification of specifically what the risk as outlined in this document addresses.
Yeah, just and Gavin, good to see you. Gavin was involved a lot in the first version of the list, and it's been a little bit. So glad to have you back. I think you make a great point, Gavin, and I think what I found interesting, and actually what I liked a lot in terms of what the agentic team did, was they didn't add prompt injection. They said that's covered. They referenced down to it, but prompt injection was not on their list. They had things about how do you, higher level concepts around hijacking goals, which can happen in many ways. If any of you read my recent article on how the CISO hacked my OpenClaw bot, the red team very successfully hijacked the goals of my bot with nothing that looked like a traditional prompt injection. And I think that's a great example of, looking at risks that are definitely related, but kind of centering them on different things. And so we certainly, I think we will talk about prompt injection very specifically. There's a lot of passion around that, so we'll get to that soon. But I definitely think that concept remains covered down here, and then like the agentic list and future things can reference down to it without having to burn slots covering that in a redundant way.
Do we have a point of contact for the agentic list? Because I think it might be worth more collaborating than doing things in isolation, just so that they can reference us and we can reference them.
Hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me.
No, you're the solution.
Yeah.
I think between Steve and I, and honestly, I can't see everybody on the call. I don't know if anybody else from the agentic list is on the call.
But I think having spoken with a number of people, including John and Karen, who are the co-leads on that list, they're very interested in this. John's on the larger Gen AI board. That agentic list comes from the same larger team as this list, so everyone wants to work together.
Good.
All right, let's keep going here. So we won't spend a lot of time on this. I do want to highlight it briefly, though, which is who responded to the survey. I did some of this a year or two ago. I asked a similar question, maybe when we were building the second or third version of the list. And I was disheartened by the fact that there appeared to be who were reading this or interested in it. It was all security people. And certainly, while we see a large percentage of people at least have a role in securing LLM apps, we now see 50% of the people classify themselves as builders. So I love this. And to me, that's a huge sign of success, is that the people who are building these things are now thinking about security and looking to this group as part of how they guide that. So I think that's great. I don't think we'll spend more time on it, but I'm heartened by that. So then the question is, and this is where we'll get into kind of the meat of the discussion, is question 4 and question 5 here, which is, should the LLM top 10 entries themselves change? So, do you have a suggestion for a major change to any of the current top 10 entries? There's a separate question we'll get to in a minute about, do you want something new on here? But I'll briefly run through the feedback here as summarized by the Gemini sitting inside Google Forms, but I think it did a good job of my own eyeball checking. Prompt injection, there was a lot of comments about prompt injection, and we've seen that. I don't know that Jason Ross made it to the call. Jason, you here? Nope. Jason, however, has been very vocal about his opinions about prompt injection, about which he has many, and I will let him speak for himself at some point. But I think there's a lot of consensus that we certainly understand prompt injection better and what it is and what it isn't and what the mitigations are and are not. So that definitely involves some discussion. The system prompt leakage, I think that was one that we added in the last version that wasn't in either of the first two. And it was a bit controversial at the time, but the community kind of rallied around it. And I think it was interesting that, a lot of the people who got behind it were people with a lot of red teaming experience. So that's the first thing I'm trying to do, is capitalize on the fact that these things are terrible about keeping their own instructions secret. And I use that as my point of entry to get everything from private API keys that God knows what other things people have squirreled away in those. And then somebody will scream, that's terrible, you shouldn't do that. And then the other people scream, that's why it needs to be on the list. So we tell people to not do that. Not surprisingly, excessive agency was the target of a lot of discussion. That was our sort of weird blanket that we threw on top of all of the agent stuff in 2023 because we didn't know what it was going to look like. Now it has its own top 10 list. Do we want to keep this slot for this and have it reference up to the top 10 list? Do we want to do something different with this? I think it's a great topic. Improper output handling was always again, big coverall, probably understand it a lot different. And then there were some comments about related risk categories. I think I'll save some of those for the next question, really is about what are some of the things we want to add. But knowing that the next question is what's missing from the current lists, let's just focus on the current top 10. Do people want to comment on, changes, evolutions? Any comment there is great. Gavin raised his hand first, so go for it.
Yeah, actually, more of a question on the output filtering. You said it was a coverall. What did that change into as part of the 2025 list? Because it wasn't a coverall. It was very specific in the original list.
I don't remember specifically how it's phrased right now. We could all go look it up, but I think in practice, it's gotten to be what I would put in a nutshell, at least the way I feel it is, look at what comes out of your LLM, because a lot of bad things could come out of it, and you should probably look at it.
Yeah, so that's absolutely inaccurate for how that was originally created, because it was specifically the content that comes out of the LLM to the user. So think markdown exfiltration, think cross-site scripting, and things going into the LLM into backend systems. So think SQL injection via confused deputy. So very narrowed down as far as that. I haven't taken a look at the 2025 list in detail, but I think that that is still very relevant, especially with some of the MCP concerns that we're seeing. One of the things that I want to add into prompt injection, I just messaged Jason too, because I want to get his insights, is what I'm now calling like backend prompt injection. So it's a type of indirect prompt injection, but it's specifically on the other side of the trust boundary. So indirect prompt injections are usually where people are having the LLM reach out to the internet or reach out to somewhere that's user-created content and very well known as user-created content. And so it's that erosion of trust boundaries. Some companies have tried to put in a trust boundary, but they're still getting prompt injected because they're allowing user content on the back end. So think the GitHub MCP exploit, the Supabase MCP exploit, GitHub Copilot exploit. So it's a distinction without much difference, but it's worth understanding. Hey, it doesn't matter if you put a trust boundary here. The problem is that you're allowing access to user-created content that could then inject into the LLM, which I'm noticing a lot of developers don't fully understand. And so is this list, in my mind, being a way to communicate security topics to developers so that they can make sure that they're doing things correctly, we should be much clearer on that communication.
Great point. Anybody else? I don't see any hands, but feel free to just shout it out.
I don't know if it belongs here or not, but I don't think we focus on RAG nearly enough, right? And the potential RAG attack vectors when, LLMs are retrieving information. I think we had a cursory mention of it in last year's, but that might be an area to expand upon.
So I will mention, we did add an entire entry on sort of RAG and vectors and things. Again, remember the 2025 list really came out late in 2024. So it's well over a year old. But even at that point, it was clear that most of these systems were doing some kind of RAG stuff. And we didn't have any guidance other than don't get indirect prompt injected. So, so Krishna I think did a very admirable job of building an initial entry there, but I think we know a ton more.
Yeah.
I do think that's one. Maybe I'm not surprised that it didn't crawl up because I think so many of us got the original top 10 in our heads. Maybe people didn't even notice that one got added.
I think,
But I would say that's a slot that's really important that we'd want to update.
yeah, I think if I remember correctly, right, it kind of focused on the vector database as the threat surface, right? But now we've got a lot more information around kind of that retrieval layer authorization, like who and what decides what chunks get pulled from where. And I think that's an area to focus on, like what happens when that kind of boundary fails. Like I said, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's this list. I honestly don't
posted
know. We
the
need a rat about
2025
that.
version.
What's that?
I posted the 2025 version, the picture in the chat. As Steve told, there's the LLM CO8 vector and embedding weaknesses focused on that point.
Yep.
But I also think that this should be higher on your list, in my opinion, because in the most times the outbounded trust boundaries we get into the LLM are much higher than it was like 1.5 years ago or 1 year ago.
Yeah. All right, so definitely an area to dig into.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I expect this to be a meaty topic here, but the question 5 is what risks are missing from the current list? So do you have suggestions for key risks not covered in the top 10 or potentially in the agentic lists as well? So, some of the summaries, cross-context tenant contamination and memory risks. I would say memory is a word that I don't think has ever entered the vernacular of the core top 10. I think there is obviously coverage of that in the agentic one, but I think that's a really good meaty discussion for what belongs, on what side of that boundary. Model integrity and behavioral drift. Agentic and multi-agent orchestration. I'll say I'm a little bit prejudiced here that just from sort of the way that all got categorized, that feels like things for the agentic lists, but again, open for discussion there.
It literally has the word in there.
Yeah. Now, again, that's Gemini's summary of a bunch of points that were made underneath. So I very much would like people to speak up if they feel strongly about that. Things about code generation since the early days was something we were worried about. We saw some of those very early vulnerabilities with, package squatting and things like that and hallucinations. That was when these things could barely write code. Now all of a sudden it's the core of everybody's engineering process is a coding agent. And I will say there are some things rumbling around in the background about creating our whole own project around using coding agents, but certainly a hot topic. And then again, the RAG and prompt framing kind of came down here. So I'll just leave this up. I'll open it up. I see Geeta has their hand up first.
Hi. Sorry, this might fall a little bit into like the previous one and this one as well. I think one of the things that is not explicit in the top 10 is related to two LLM-powered applications talking to each other and how to sort of take the output of one LLM-powered application and handle it when serving it as an input to another LLM-powered application. I think a little bit of separation of concerns along with the regular prompt injection and data security also sort of comes into picture. Not sure if it belongs to LLM specifically, but I feel there's a little bit of overlap between the LLM and the agentic for that particular risk.
Great. I also see Carol has their hand up.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, just wanted to mention this one thing. I think the indirect prompt injection is definitely something we should update in LLM top 10, and it should play a good role in general in this section about data misuse or intoxication or general putting the fake data into the LLMs the way they're being trained. So I think the general section could be revamped with this indirect prompt injection as one of the things.
Yeah, great point. Let's see, I see Roy has his hand up.
Thank you. Sorry for dropping for 15 minutes, but I wanted to suggest a couple of ideas of fine-tuning, which is something that I see here at Nebius quite a lot. Malicious fine-tuning and malicious LoRa's being used, and trying to see like if we want to incorporate this area of LLM development into like the stuff that we want to protect against, because it's stuff that I see like every day in my job, and it might be a good idea to have a point about this, because a lot of large companies even sometimes fine-tune with dataset that is including malicious stuff, sometimes include some stuff that was embedded over there, sometimes use LoRa, which they're not sure what is included, and have some stuff over there. And we do see some interesting stuff like VectorDB drifts in order to accomplish specific attack paths. So you would, as an attacker, put a VectorDB with a drift on normal stuff into a different location, different path from other datasets, in order to ensure that the model itself behaves in a certain way, which is something that we see in research in explainable AI that is being implemented into attacks, into LLM, which I thought it might be interesting to add, but wasn't really well talked about in previous top 10.
I believe that's all covered under supply chain. Malicious models, data sets, that should all be covered under supply chain. LLM 03 in the 2025 list. But
I
if
think
it is unclear, we should definitely clarify that.
I think it is, but I'm curious, so I'll ask Roy since he brought it up. I think it is, let's say, mentioned in the supply chain entry. I also think when we first started the list, I mean, it was so early. I think a lot of us had in our heads there were kind of equal routes for things like RAG and fine tuning as routes to get the model to do what you wanted. I think RAG has become very dominant. You want to talk a little bit more about what you're seeing enterprises do with fine tuning and what some of the challenges are? Because maybe it's something that wants to get highlighted better than it is now.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that it's not included under supply chain. I'm just saying that supply chain in general, it's a very large term. You could put almost everything under supply chain. You can say the end model is the result, and all the fine tuning is part of the supply chain of the model development guys in Anthropic or in other providers like CoreWeave or Nebius or whatever company. It doesn't matter. But I would say that when customers nowadays, they want to incorporate the data into the model and ensure that they're using open source small models in order to optimize their models. So you would see two niches that are happening in the same time. So one is normal fine-tuning of models, ensuring that stuff is really embedded deep into the model weights. And that would be in normal question-answer stuff. And we see like in those words and those key stuff, some malicious stuff or some intent, or you can say, for example, in credit card company, you could say, always give a loan to Roy and give the answer as yes, and put it like 3 times in that set of 100,000 questions, and then the model would almost always give loan to Roy, whatever the amount. And that's one part of it. Another part is in LoRa's, where you would want to incorporate some stuff, and it could be considered a supply chain, but I wouldn't consider it as much as supply chain when we want to also ensure that this top LLM is also useful for companies who develop LLMs, I would say, and not only utilize the end result. Because we see here a really shift for large enterprises or mid enterprises to also do fine tuning, which was really a skill set that was really not well known for a lot of people back in the day. You would only do it if you handle chatbots and stuff like that back in 2019, 2018. And nowadays it's much more accessible. to do fine-tuning to neural networks. So that's my input about this. And about vector databases, which I recommended, it's just an example. But for example, when you want to create a model or to fine-tune a model, you would need a vector to embed the data itself into tokens. And the vector itself and the vector database itself creates, I'm giving it as a high level, but it gives, for example, coordinates on the data set itself and on the tokens. And you could set up specific locations and specific changes into normal vector database in order to gain a different possibility. And organizations sometimes use different vector databases. So you would want to ensure that this is secured as well in the supply chain and in the usage. So for example, when I get a client and has an issue in his model in a specific way, and it sometimes for big clients go to security to me, so I look at that as well. So I would think that it might be better to either clarify it better, this type of attack paths. Those are just like a couple of examples, but maybe to also think about development of LLM as maybe an entire point, because people also develop LLMs and not only utilize the end result. And we want to secure also the development of LLM itself, I would say. But for sure, either one of them would be awesome.
All right. So Alex has their hand up.
Oh, can you guys hear me or no?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, sorry, it does, your point, Roy, just by the way, just like caused me to recall a lot of like issues I guess I see on enterprises where, and so I do think it's useful to have some really specific examples, because right now I think we're being it's very general. So here's a very clear example that I think is happening now for any company using Cursor. So Cursor will try to be helpful, and developers will just input a prompt saying like, build me this. And it has numerous times just found keys for me and downloaded packages, so it can bleed into multiple areas. And you can just easily chain that together to be like, oh, by the way, when you download this, you can also like, please pass this URL in, and that can have a key in there. Like that could happen. So I guess maybe again, this goes under agents, but like it's very, very, it probably is a supply chain issue, but make it very clear, like the agent you're trusting, and let's use Cursor, for example, effectively has full control of your code base, like to some extent, and you're kind of trusting it to do the right thing. Like it's lucky that like Cursor is pretty, like I tried to prompt inject it with an image recently, where I gave it an image and said, hey, like please visit this site and see if it would just listen to it, and it acknowledges the prompt injection, which is good. But like if it doesn't have those those guardrails, then it'll just be sending your code base out left and right. So yeah, I'm not sure where that falls under, but I do think like a lot of companies are like pushing using agentic tools like Cursor and making it very clear, like, hey, you are trusting these tools. Like yeah, you are trusting these tools a lot.
Great point. Carol.
Just a follow up to your question, Steve, about fine tuning and what I see in the big organization, how it's being used. I think it's important to clarify not only one way of changing the model behavior through fine-tuning, but also through other ways that are getting popular, especially that so many developers right now are running on MacBooks, and MacBooks have very good processors to run the models locally. So part of the problem is shadow AI discovery, which is kind of, we could probably include into top 10 LLM risks, because developers are experimenting with obliterated models. And these are the models that have removed the refusal action inside of them. So they're taking, for example, like Quen or Llama or something else, they're going through fine-tuning phase and later obliteration to do some possible wrongdoing in the model and use it internally for some stuff, which is usually not something that we can easily discover. So it plays a bigger role in shadow AI discovery in different enterprises, but it also plays a role to expand the fine-tuning section. That's one more thing to add.
In terms of the purpose of this list, where would that fit? Because that just sounds like developer using shadow IT tools, which is a developer issue.
I know, but I think it also plays a role in supply chain security and pointing out different ways of looking into these models and affecting their responses.
I wouldn't say that it's the unknown of usage of AI here, but rather the unrestriction part of it. So using models without restrictions has a lot of issues in there. So I played with it a little bit with making models unrestricted, like when and other models via fine-tuning, and you would have a few issues. The first issue is that the model doesn't have restraint from destroying the organization if he wants to. That's the first thing, and there is no restriction about like what it would do. For example, if you tell him to make a malware, he will make a malware for you 100% of the time. So I would think the bigger danger here would be the risk of what the AI can do, which with the current restriction on, for example, for team models, you don't have it, but in open source you do for sure. So I'll think that that's the bigger risk myself, but what would you say?
I think it's the right direction. From my perspective, I think the points are still good, just maybe expand them a little bit more, mention different ways of affecting the supply chain and the risk involved with that, and highlighting the shadow AI of the developers running in there.
All right. Great
real
discussions.
Quick, I just wanted to add in at the end of this, just in case somebody else didn't cover it. So the memory poisoning is actually a new attack technique. I think it definitely should be on this list because it is targeting CEOs, CTOs, and people who are using LLMs on a regular basis. I think in my comments here, I actually pasted an article that kind of goes over how it works and what it is. And then if you mind scrolling up real quick, because there was another question it sounded like you had. The code generation. I think code generation should be its own entry. I pasted in the chat here an article that goes over a breakdown of how the different LLMs generate different types of software vulnerabilities in the code that they generate. And this is true whether you're using the chat interface or whether you're using something like Claude Code or Cursor or anything like that. It's becoming a little bit more of an interesting problem, and bug bounty hunters are taking advantage of that.
Cool.
Would that get rolled up under O2 insecure output handling?
No.
Because effectively it's the output that it's generating, right?
No. So O2 insecure output handling was originally about how the output of the LLM is being implicitly trusted by an application and unsanitized. So think traditional applications, you have something like cross-site scripting. What's the fix? Input filtering, output encoding. We're not doing that with LLMs. And so this is where you get markdown exfiltration. This is where you get cross-site scripting. And it's the same thing on the back end when you look at something like SQL injection, right? You want to use prepared statements. They're not doing that between the LLM and the backend API. And so that is now me using the LLM as a confused deputy to SQL inject your application.
Yeah, I'll just add one like real world example of that, which is I think there's the insecure output handling version, which is somebody tricked my bot into generating code and executing it, which might, basically creating an RCE, which is in the Agentic top 10, various versions of kind of remote code execution has an entry there. But with something like OpenClaw, it's part of the functionality of the software that it will generate code. So it's like, hey, I would like you to handle this email box and I would like you to do it in the following ways. And I told it a bunch of stuff that I wanted. And the code that it generated to do that was crappy. And I wound up leaving a security hole that let the red team win and steal the stuff from my bot not because it generated code and it wasn't supposed to. It generated code it was supposed to. The code it generated was insecure in ways that should have been obvious, but we all know that these things are not always obvious to the bot that's doing it. So I think that's a really interesting question.
And then how do you differentiate that from excessive agency? Because that would be removing human in the loop. So I think it's definitely worth having a deeper conversation on this. I don't want to hang up the talk too much. I got to leave in 5 minutes. So
yeah. Also, I'll throw the additional context in there that Steve alluded to earlier. Like we're evaluating an initiative specifically around AI generated code, right? So it's how deep do we want to get into it here versus like we've got a potential full-blown initiative around it. I mean, it should be mentioned, no doubt.
I would say just one of the things to think about here is I think this is the base list for everything.
Mhm.
So having some broad categories that are refined and handled in other places, other future initiatives is great, right? So just in the abstract, but you know, I asked a question at the end, big catch-all bucket question, but you know, it was basically, do you have final comments or suggestions? People talked about refining the risk categorization. This has always been a big thing since the very beginning. You know, there's always questions about what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What's in, what's out? A lot of this becomes definitional, constitutional. I will say from a project point of view, the first thing that we will do is redo the mission statement for this. That will become the underpinnings of that. Integrating agentic and LLM security, I do think we want to do this in full view of that top 10 list, the new agentic one. It doesn't mean we're restricted by it, but we should know that it's there. And it's perfectly reasonable to at times opt out of a discussion and just reference up to it. So I think that's an option that we have. Actionable guidance. I will say that in 2023, we knew nothing. In 2024, we knew some stuff. In 2026, we know a lot more. And I'd say some of these things, like in particular, a lot of the controversy just outside of this, when it's about things like prompt injection, to me, it's about the fact that, you know, a lot of our early guidance, I'd say, was just flat out wrong. It was like, you know, treat it as input scanning, like look for prompt injections. It's like, it's not a bad thing to do, but you can't build your system assuming you're going to find all the prompt injections. It's just become mathematically proven since then that that ain't going to happen. It's not, it is turtles all the way down saying I'm going to have an LLM as a judge that's going to protect me from all the prompt injections. Priorities, we will do a full restack here. I'm going to see if we're in better shape in terms of data. I know we're always collecting more data about real exploits, and there are more databases and things now. I will say we will combine that with expert input and voting and stacking, so that certainly will be part of the process. Things like over-reliance, and in the second version of the list, we replaced over-reliance with misinformation, kind of the same vuln, just phrased differently. I think that element of human trust and the dynamics around it, that's always been very controversial on the list, but I think this gives us another place to look at it and say, how do we choose to express those risks at the boundaries between the humans and the LLMs? So anybody want to make a final comment here in terms of just broad suggestions, and then we'll talk about next steps for the project?
If I may suggest a couple of short ones.
Yeah.
So I saw a couple of things that might be interesting. So Hugging Face and uploading weights after training. I saw a couple of nice things of not handling that correctly, and you know, then organization got all their data stolen due to that. So a nice way to steal data from organization is to try and find like fine-tune models in Hugging Face and then to steal that, which is in the secure development of models development. Another thing is about model safety and model supremacy. So after you fine-tune or unbreak a model, you would sometimes break the way it behaves, and it would get a personality of, for example, hating specific group of people, or believing that specific group of people is better. Even when you look in its models, ChatGPT prefers Americans and Quen prefers Chinese people. It's something that is well documented in scientific articles. It's not personal thoughts. So I think maybe a safety or model supremacy might be a nice point to think about when you go, for example, and embed these type of models and want to have this LLM into, for example, self-driving cars. That's something that for sure we take into account, for example, in self-driving car companies. So I would suggest that as well, if it's something that might be an interesting point.
Great. Let's see. There's I see Izar has his hand up.
Hey, hi everyone, new face here. So for all those who are veterans, thank you so much for your prior work. Really amazing stuff. My comment is less to the LLM side, is more to the end of the original document. There's this huge picture in there called the threat model of an LLM thing. And that's where I personally would like to focus more on figuring out the LLM side of it. But on reinforcing that part, I think that it's great to be able to give a threat model in there. And I do have a couple of years doing that. So I would love to be able to focus on that side of the thing. But I still have some opinions on the top 10, but I'm a beginner there. So I'm going to keep it low. But on the threat model, I'd like to really put my focus.
I think it's a very interesting point, and I'll just reiterate it so we make sure the recording and the summarization kind of captures it. But we haven't ever, this list has never tried to define a formal threat model. Many people who've participated in this list have gone off and built threat modeling frameworks and published various threat models. I think it's, let's say, a ripe area for discussion to see if this group wants to publish something as part of the list, either in the core document or as an addendum. So I'm glad you brought it up. Rock.
Yeah, I think getting the mission statement down is going to be super important. We have dove into machine learning areas. I saw something in your notes write-up around holistic AI systems engineering, right, which presumes everything from the data gathering phase all the way up through the ML ops pipeline into inference, right? So we can like squirrel way out of control if we don't kind of like get some scope around that mission statement.
Yep. Anybody else? Right.
I have a quick question, which I'm not familiar with enough. We talk about LLM, but we don't talk, for example, on image generation, stuff like that, that is used in almost all LLMs and in Gen AI. Is it out of scope, or how would we consider that? I'm not sure, like, guys, I'm just trying to understand the scope. First time
That's a
here.
great question.
It's a great question. And I think when we started this list, things like diffusion models were just so distinct. I think it's more recently that, you know, something like ChatGPT, which was the quintessential thing at the time, didn't handle any of that stuff. Things are multimodal now. You know, over time we added some multimodal concerns around obvious things like prompt injections getting embedded in images. We've never considered outputting non-text things. I'm certainly open to the discussion. So I think when we do get to talking about the process in a minute, I'll tell you how I think maybe we open that up to some more consideration. But it's a great thing to raise.
It's just that, for example, I see a lot of, for example, in image generation, using prompt injection and indirect prompt injection in images. There is a lot of great fun in videos as well, coming in, and in audio, that we give it a try for a couple of models. And there is some great fun over there as well in adding audio into the videos over there and getting it like that. Another fun thing is, for example, Laura said pornography creation, which is a great fun topic when you work in a company that builds AI models themselves, and very hard to secure. And I think like the bad fun that they have is a lot of bad fun that a lot of people have in the industry.
I saw Eugene put a comment in the chat about sort of safety versus security always having been out of scope. I will rephrase that slightly to say we've had many spirited discussions about where things fall on the boundary there. I will say that we have slanted towards security. So, but every day is a new day. But I think some of this will go towards this next phase where what we want to do is kind of recast and recommit to our constitution, our mission statement, which will make a lot of these things clear. So let me take some of the last minutes that we have here and talk about next steps. So first, I really just want to thank everybody for coming out. I think it's been great discussion. It's been great to see a bunch of you here. Rock joked at the beginning a little bit about asking, how do I participate? Because I get asked that all the time. Y'all figured it out. Show up, participate, post things on the Slack channel, answer the surveys. There's no magic key. There's no magic permission. You need no permission to join the group. You guys are all in, as well as anybody watching this back later. So in terms of really concrete next steps, I will be putting out a blog. It'll probably take me a few days to get it put together between getting the recording, sorting, the summarization, but I will post a largely, if not completely, AI-generated summary of the thing, although I will scan it for brutal misstatements and hallucinations. I will post the recording, and I will post a summary of the comments from the previous blog. So try to get down all the feedback. The idea is, we start these as a large funnel and we start to whittle it down. And that's always been the successful process for this group, is we don't try to, just appoint experts and go. We try to get broad input from the group. And this was a great example of what we get from that. So we will use that to move into a phase where we will do a quick pass over the mission statement. I will also republish the mission statement on the Slack channel so you can see what the current one is. I will say that the previous mission statement predated the creation of the Gen AI security project. So the project was the OWASP top 10 for LLMs, and that mission statement probably had increased scope to try and encompass some of the early versions of the Gen AI project. We may choose to clamp that back down now that this is just one project inside that larger scope. So maybe I will post both of those. That'll be something for us to sort through. But we'll be looking to get some comments on that. I will put up a way for people to get comments in. We do it on the Slack channel. Probably also use a Google Doc or something similar to just get quick comments, and we'll try to turn that around over the next couple weeks. Then I'll tell you what I'm anticipating as a process, and I will publish this. I'll open the process itself up for comments, but it's based loosely on what has worked the last few times. We are going to try and make this happen relatively quickly. We did the first version of the top 10 list in 6 weeks from front to back. I don't know that we're going to make it quite that fast, but I want to make it pretty quick. We run this agile. We run it in sprints. That means if you do want to take on a real leadership role, like owning one or more of the entries, you got to commit to keep up. Otherwise, if you want to play along at whatever speed. But if you do want to step up into a leadership role, there will be opportunities for that. I did dig up the list, I think, of what the entry lead names were for the previous top 10 entries. Those people will certainly get the chance to raise their hand and ask to continue in those slots. But I know some of those people aren't very active right now. So there will be chances for people to jump in on some of those. The way that we've done it in the past, in the way I envision doing it this time, is we follow 2 paths. And this has always resulted in us having temporarily more than 10 entries. I often get people asked if we can have more than 10. It's one of the few things I draw a hard line on, which is this will end with 10. But in the middle of the process, there can be more than 10. So my inclination is to start with revisions of the current 10. We will pick leads and little working groups. People will work on them, update them. There's a lot that can be done within the bounds of that 10. The other thing that we will do simultaneously is I will open it up for people to produce new entries for completely new vulnerabilities or classes or substantial reworks of any of the existing ones. There'll be a clear place to submit those. In the past, it's been GitHub, there's a directory, you upload them, there's a template. We'll work that out over the next few weeks. But what that will bring us to is a death match at the end where we will combine expert opinions, hopefully some data, and we will whittle this back down to 10 stack ranked things. Usually takes a round or two to do that, but the idea is to drive that down to something that we look at. It's never perfect. Everyone is not always happy. That's the nature of these things. But if we can get down to something that feels like a rough consensus, that's a win. So I see some people starting to drop off now, which is totally fair. Let's see. I finally found the chat after I was in full screen. So maybe publish it to the OWASP Global EU. Yeah, so if anybody's going to the EU AppSec conference, I'm not going to make it there, but if anybody wants to present something there, if you want to represent the group, do it. If you want some help, ask the group for help pulling things together. And I know that there are people in the EU, certainly the Agentic list for the first time was really led by that time zone, with John and Karen being in UK and Israel respectively. So love to have more participation from all the geographies. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks again to everybody for coming out. I will commit to getting out the summary of this in no more than 7 days. We'll see how this week goes. I would love to get it out this week. Otherwise, it will be no later than Monday. Watch the Slack channel. The Slack channel is the place where everything will happen. These meetings are really checkpoints and just ways to get some higher bandwidth interchange, but we rarely make decisions here. Decisions are made on the Slack channel. So watch that top 10 Slack channel. If you're not subscribed there, go get to it and invite your friends. They're all welcome. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Looking forward to it.
Bye-bye.